Let me start with something that happened on April 8, 2026, the day the United States and Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. Within hours, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth walked to a podium and said these exact words, quote, "You are digging out your remaining launchers and missiles with no ability to replace them. You have no defense industry." Let that land for a moment. The mood in Washington that afternoon was almost celebratory. The consensus across the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, and the mainstream press was absolute. The campaign had achieved its ultimate objective. The Iranian military machine had been defanged, its factories reduced to rubble, and its supply chains severed. The narrative was set in stone. No defense industry, no ability to replace them. Set on the record, publicly. April 8, 2026. Now hold that statement. Because exactly 7 weeks later, on May 31st, 2026, CNN published a major investigation using commercial satellite imagery. What CNN found is this. Iran had already reopened 50 out of the 69 tunnel entrances that the United States and Israel had spent weeks and billions of dollars burying. Not 5, not 10, 50 out of 69, using bulldozers, using dump trucks. When you examine those satellite passes closely, you do not see high-tech military engineering teams or specialized recovery units. You see civilian-grade construction equipment. You see standard yellow excavators. You see heavy-duty dump trucks moving earth day and night, clearing away the rock and debris that Western planners assumed would seal those facilities forever. And I find it remarkable that this contradiction is not on the front page of every newspaper in the world. The Secretary of Defense of the United States said Iran had no defense industry. 7 weeks later, CNN's own satellite analysis showed Iran was 72% restored. These two facts cannot both be true. One of them is a narrative designed for public consumption. The other is a physical reality documented from orbit. So here is the question this entire video exists to answer. If the most sophisticated air campaign in modern memory just targeted Iran's missile infrastructure, B-2 bombers, bunker-busting bombs, hundreds of cruise missiles, how is it 72% restored in 7 weeks? How did a nation supposedly stripped of its defense industry reverse the effects of a multi-billion-dollar air campaign in less than 50 days? Are you ready? Let's go. Before we get into the evidence, I need to give you the right analytical lens. Because without it, this story looks like a planning mistake, an oversight, an embarrassment to be corrected next time. That is the completely wrong way to read this. I want to introduce you to what I am calling the Asymmetric Reconstitution Doctrine. Once you see it, you will never look at these conflicts the same way again. To understand this doctrine, you have to understand a fundamental shift in how modern states prepare for war. For decades, Western military doctrine has been built on the concept of technological dominance. The idea that if you possess the stealthiest planes, the most precise guidance systems, and the heaviest bombs, you can destroy any target and break your opponent's will to fight. But what happens when your opponent accepts from day one that they cannot match your technology? They do not try to build a better shield. Instead, they build a cheaper, faster way to rebuild their assets after you break them. Here is the simplest way to explain it. Imagine two people in a boxing match. One spent 20 years learning to throw the most devastating punch imaginable. The other spent 20 years learning to absorb that exact punch and still be standing 30 seconds later. The puncher lands everything he has. It costs him enormously. And then his opponent slowly stands back up because he was engineered specifically to survive that punch. That is what Iran has been building underground since the early 2000s. In Persian, the military establishment calls this padafand ghair amel, or passive defense. It is the art of surviving an overwhelming physical attack without relying on active air defenses. It means burying your most critical strategic assets so deep and distributing them so widely that the enemy is forced to exhaust their most expensive munitions just to achieve temporary disruption. The Asymmetric Reconstitution Doctrine is the strategic concept where a militarily inferior power engineers its assets, its weapons, its tunnels, its storage, to be not just survivable, but rapidly restorable after a first strike. The goal is not to win the first battle. The goal is to still be standing after it. You accept tactical defeat. You design for operational resilience. If your opponent has to spend $3 million on a precision-guided bunker buster to close a tunnel, and you can reopen that tunnel in 48 hours using a $30,000 bulldozer and $500 worth of diesel fuel, you are not losing the war of attrition. You are winning it. And the fact that no major news channel is framing it this way is honestly one of the most important analytical failures I have seen in years. Once you understand the Asymmetric Reconstitution Doctrine, three things immediately come into focus. First, why the US campaign produced tactical success and strategic ambiguity simultaneously. Second, why Iran's missile capability is recovering faster than every American intelligence timeline predicted. Third, why the Strait of Hormuz has just become the most dangerous waterway on Earth, and why almost nobody is connecting that directly to the tunnel story. 3 sections. Let me take you through them one by one. Here is what the mainstream narrative tells us happened. In June 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion. 12 days of strikes on Iran's nuclear sites and military infrastructure. Iran fired over 550 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 armed drones in response. The United States entered on June 22nd with B-2 Spirit stealth bombers in Operation Midnight Hammer, dropping bunker-busting bombs on Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. A ceasefire was reached June 24th. Hostilities resumed in early 2026. Another US campaign, another ceasefire, April 8th. The scale of these air campaigns is difficult to overstate. During Operation Midnight Hammer, the skies over Iran were filled with the roar of heavy bombers and the flash of hundreds of cruise missiles. This was not a limited surgical strike. This was a sustained, high-intensity air campaign meant to fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Middle East. The Pentagon's post-strike assessments were filled with high-resolution imagery showing collapsed entrances, cratered runways, and pulverized warehouses. The public message from Washington was consistent throughout. Iran was decimated. Its military shattered. It had no defense industry. These were not anonymous leaks. These were on-camera statements from President Trump and Secretary Hegseth. But those assessments made a classic intelligence error. They equated visible surface damage with permanent functional destruction. Now let me show you what the documented evidence actually says. First source. This is not from Iran. This is not from Russia. This is from CNN, which published a satellite investigation on May 31st, 2026, using imagery from Planet Labs PBC, a commercial satellite company based in San Francisco. CNN found that Iran has unblocked 50 out of 69 tunnel entrances struck by the US and Israel at 18 underground missile facilities. 72% restoration in 7 weeks. Think about the logistical coordination required to pull that off. We are talking about 18 geographically isolated bases spread across a vast, mountainous country. To coordinate the clearance of 50 heavily damaged tunnel portals simultaneously requires a decentralized command structure, pre-positioned heavy equipment, and a highly disciplined engineering force that knew exactly what to do the moment the bombs stopped falling. Second source. This is not from Iran. This is not from Russia. This is from the New York Times, which reported on May 12, 2026, citing classified US intelligence assessments, that Iran has regained operational access to 30 of its 33 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, the Times reported, still fields about 70% of its mobile launchers and has retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. And critically, Iran has regained access to roughly 90% of its underground missile storage and launch facilities nationwide, which are now assessed to be partially or fully operational. Hold that number, 90%. This means the underground cities, the vast subterranean networks that Iran calls its missile cities, were largely untouched by the thousands of tons of munitions dropped from above. The missiles were safe, the crews were safe, the command and control nodes were safe. All that had happened was that the front doors had been temporarily blocked with dirt and rock. Third source. This is not from Iran. This is not from Russia. This is from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, a nonpartisan Washington research organization routinely cited in congressional testimony. ISW's special report from May 13, 2026, confirmed that Iran was degraded operationally and then prepared itself for a new round of fighting. Now, here is the quiet part said out loud. A U.S. official told CNN on background, documented and on record, the Iranians have exceeded all timelines the intelligence community had for reconstitution. Every single timeline. Exceeded. How could the entire Western intelligence apparatus get this so wrong? It is because they were measuring recovery using Western economic and industrial metrics. They assumed that because Iran could not easily manufacture new precision components under heavy sanctions, they could not field a functional force. They ignored the sheer brute force simplicity of physical clearing operations. Sam Lair, a research associate at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute, one of the world's most respected non-proliferation institutions, based in Monterey, California, said to CNN, "The U.S. military is good at delivering tactical successes, and entombing and suppressing the Iranian missile force is a great example of that. However, if that isn't accompanied by a set of reasonable strategic war aims and an achievable theory of victory, it can end up being a strategic failure." Tactical success, strategic failure. From an American researcher at an American institution. It is the classic trap of modern military power. We confuse the ability to destroy with the ability to control. We confuse a cratered road with a defeated adversary. But here is where the story gets far more interesting, because the speed of this restoration is not the accident everyone is treating it as. The numbers behind the missile stockpile recovery are the part nobody is talking about. I want to walk you through a sequence of events, not opinions, events, exact dates. On December 8, 2025, 6 months before CNN's investigation, a senior Israel Defense Forces official testified to the Israeli Knesset that Iran had resumed large-scale production of ballistic missiles. This was reported by the Critical Threats Project, affiliated with the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, not from Tehran, from Jerusalem via Washington. 4 days later, on December 12, 2025, the Institute for the Study of War published analysis showing Iran had reconstituted its heavy missile stockpile to approximately 2,000 missiles. Think about what that number means. In the 12-day war of June 2025, Iran had fired over 550 ballistic missiles. By July 2025, between 1,100 and 1,300 remained. By December, 5 months later, the stockpile stood at 2,000. From 1,100 to 2,000 in 5 months. That is an estimated production rate of nearly 180 heavy ballistic missiles per month. For a country under the most severe sanctions regime in human history, during a period of active conflict, that is an industrial miracle. Or, more accurately, it is proof of an external supply chain that operates completely outside the reach of Western interdiction. I want you to sit with that. Now let me connect the second thread, and this is the connection no major news network is making. On the same morning the U.S.-Iran ceasefire was announced, April 8, 2026, the very morning Hegseth made his no defense industry statement, Russia was already doing something that was not connected to that statement in real time by a single major Western outlet. The ISW's special report from May 9, 2026, documented that Russia was shipping drone and missile components to Iran through the Caspian Sea to help Iran rebuild its offensive capabilities. Not assembled weapons, components, small enough to move through a route no U.S. warship can interdict without triggering a direct confrontation with a nuclear power. Let's look closely at the Caspian Sea. It is a completely landlocked body of water bordered only by Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. There is no international waterway there. There is no U.S. Fifth Fleet patrolling those shipping lanes. There are no destroyer escorts or maritime boarding teams. Russia can load a cargo ship in Astrakhan, sail it directly south across the Caspian, and unload it at the Iranian port of Bandar Anzali or Amirabad with absolute impunity. The ships turn off their AIS transponders, disappearing from global tracking databases in what maritime analysts call dark voyages. On the same day Hegseth said Iran had no defense industry, Russia was actively rebuilding that industry, part by part, through a back door the United States cannot close. This is the geopolitical reality of the new multipolar world. You cannot isolate a nation when a neighboring nuclear superpower is committed to keeping its logistical lines open. Now let me take you to the physical infrastructure, the tunnels themselves. CNN's March 2026 investigation had already mapped 27 underground missile bases with 107 individual tunnel entrances across Iran, mountain hideouts buried under hundreds of meters of rock. The May investigation narrowed in on 18 bases and 69 struck entrances. Here is the military engineering detail that is not being explained properly anywhere. The US and Israeli strategy was to attack the entrances, not the facilities themselves. Why? Because the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, a nonpartisan Washington think tank advising both parties, documented this in its Operation Midnight Hammer analysis. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the most powerful conventional bomb in the American arsenal, was assessed as likely unable to penetrate Isfahan's lower levels, which are buried even deeper than Fordo. The weapons cannot reach the missiles. So the strategy was entombment. Bury the entrance, strand the missiles below. But let's look at how these tunnel entrances are actually constructed. They are not simple holes in the side of a mountain. They are engineered with sacrificial portals, extended concrete canopies designed to collapse when hit, absorbing the kinetic energy of the blast and protecting the main tunnel shaft behind them. Behind those sacrificial portals are heavy, reinforced steel blast doors that seal off the interior from the thermal wave and overpressure of a detonation. When a GBU-57 or a bunker buster strikes the entrance, it collapses the sacrificial portal, leaving a mountain of rubble. To the satellite overhead, it looks like a catastrophic collapse. The target is marked destroyed. But deep inside the mountain, the main tunnel structure, the ventilation shafts, and the power systems remain completely intact. The missiles are preserved. This is the doctrine called subterranean denial targeting. Deny access from above when you cannot destroy the asset itself. It worked tactically during the war. Iran's missile fire rate dropped significantly. But it has a structural flaw that Timur Kadyshev, a senior researcher at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg, one of Europe's foremost security research institutions, explained to CNN in one sentence. He said, "You have to use very sophisticated, very expensive weapons to do this kind of damage, and the recovery is very low tech. It's just bulldozers." Just bulldozers. Think about the economic asymmetry of that exchange. A single GBU-57 bomb costs approximately $3.5 million to manufacture. That does not include the cost of flying a B-2 Spirit bomber halfway around the world, refueling it multiple times in midair, and maintaining its stealth coating. The total operational cost of a single strike on a single tunnel entrance can easily exceed $10 million. And what does it cost to clear it? Satellite imagery from Planet Labs showed this at the Abyek facility in Caspian province, where clearance was visible by May 18th. At a base outside Isfahan, at least 18 craters had been left at a pair of tunnel entrances by US and Israeli strikes. Within weeks of the ceasefire, a single dump truck was filling those craters with dirt. The roads, previously bombed, had been repaved. A GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator costs approximately $3.5 million per unit. Iran cleared those craters with construction trucks and diesel fuel. The economic asymmetry is not incidental. It is the entire point of the strategy. If you are fighting an opponent who is willing to spend $10 million to achieve 48 hours of denial, all you have to do to win is have enough bulldozers and drivers to outlast their inventory of high-end munitions. It is an economic equation where the defender has a massive structural advantage. This is not coincidence. This is coordination. This is the Asymmetric Reconstitution Doctrine executing precisely as Iran's IRGC military planners intended when they began building this network over 2 decades ago. The tunnels were never meant to be invulnerable. They were designed to be restorable, fast, cheap, restorable. Now I want to show you the central paradox of this entire situation. The action the United States took to prevent Iran from threatening the region has structurally accelerated the very conditions it was designed to prevent. By using the ceasefire as the mechanism to end hostilities, the US gave Iran precisely the time and space required to reconstitute its underground network. Every day of ceasefire is a day of tunnel clearance. The tool of de-escalation became the enabler of rearmament. But before I go further, I want to present the strongest possible argument against everything I have just said, because I never want you to simply accept what I tell you. Here is the Steelman. The US-Israeli campaign was never designed to permanently eliminate Iran's missile force in a single conflict. It was designed to destroy the industrial replenishment chain, the factories, the supply chains, the propellant production, so severely that even if Iran reopens its tunnels, it cannot refill them over the long term. The missiles currently inside those tunnels are a finite, declining inventory, warehouses that cannot be restocked. CSIS documented that the combined force struck virtually every element of Iran's production chain, from raw material processing to final assembly. In particular, the strikes targeted the massive industrial planetary mixers used to blend the highly volatile solid fuel propellants required for Iran's most advanced precision-guided ballistic missiles, like the Khaibar-Shikan and the Fatah. These mixers are highly specialized pieces of industrial machinery, often imported through complex illicit networks, and they are incredibly difficult to replace. Without them, you cannot manufacture solid fuel rocket motors. You cannot rebuild your arsenal. Rebuilding that industrial base under the US naval blockade and ongoing sanctions will take years. The ceasefire on this reading is not a gift to Iran. It is a controlled pause during which Iran burns through an irreplaceable stockpile. That is a genuinely strong argument. I want to acknowledge that. It is a logical, coherent theory of victory based on industrial denial. But here is the one question it cannot answer. If the production chain is destroyed and the stockpile is finite and declining, why do classified US intelligence assessments, cited by the New York Times in May 2026, show Iran already reconstituted its heavy ballistic missile stockpile from 1,100 missiles in July 2025 to approximately 2,000 missiles by December 2025. Where did those missiles come from? The ISW answered that question in May 2026. Russia, shipping components through the Caspian Sea. A supply line the US naval blockade cannot touch without escalating directly against a nuclear power. You see, the Steelman assumes that Iran must manufacture everything domestically from raw chemical precursors. But Russia's intervention completely bypassed that bottleneck. Russia did not need to send finished missiles. They sent the pre-packaged solid fuel rocket motors, the advanced guidance boards, and the critical structural casings. Iran did not need to mix the propellant. They just had to assemble the modular components in their underground facilities. The Steelman assumes a closed system. Russia opened the system back up. And now both sides are locked into what political scientists call a security dilemma spiral, where each defensive action taken by one side is rationally interpreted as an offensive threat by the other, compelling further escalation from both. Iran cannot accept the destruction of its nuclear program, its military commanders, and its deterrence architecture without rebuilding, faster, deeper, and more covertly. It is structurally compelled to do so. And the United States, having publicly declared Iran decimated, cannot acknowledge the restoration without severe domestic political cost. It is trapped by its own narrative. To admit that Iran has reconstituted its force is to admit that the billions of dollars spent and the immense risks taken during the air campaigns yielded only a temporary pause. So, what does Iran do when its primary mainland deterrence, its forward missile factories, is under constant threat of American air power? It shifts its geographic focus. The ISW has documented that Iran is now actively elevating the Strait of Hormuz to what Iranian officials are calling a co-equal deterrent to nuclear weapons, meaning Iran is now positioning 20% of the world's oil supply as its new primary deterrence mechanism. That is not a retreat. That is a strategic pivot to a domain the United States cannot bomb. You cannot bomb the Strait of Hormuz to keep it open, because the very act of military conflict in those narrow waters halts shipping, spikes global insurance rates to astronomical levels, and triggers an immediate global energy crisis. The strait is a geographic choke point that is naturally insulated from standard military solutions. Let me bring everything together now. Iran built an underground missile network specifically designed to absorb a first strike and emerge within weeks with its core capability restored. The US and Israel struck it with their most advanced munitions. Within 7 weeks of the ceasefire, CNN's satellite investigation found 50 of 69 tunnel entrances already reopened. The New York Times, citing classified US intelligence, confirmed 90% of underground facilities are partially or fully operational. Russia is rebuilding Iran's industrial base through the Caspian, and Iran is pivoting to the Strait of Hormuz as its new deterrence anchor. This is not a story of failure in the traditional sense. It is a story of two different doctrines colliding, where the low-tech resilience of the defender has systematically outpaced the high-tech precision of the attacker. So where does this leave us? There are 3 critical signposts we need to watch over the coming months to understand where this confrontation is headed. The first thing to watch: whether the IAEA reports undeclared enrichment activity at a new Iranian site, possibly the location identified by Director General Rafael Grossi near Isfahan, or the deeper facility analysts have called Pickaxe Mountain. That will tell you whether the nuclear program was set back by years, as claimed, or by months. If Iran begins introducing UF6 gas into deep, newly cleared centrifuge cascades, it will prove that the physical destruction of surface facilities did not stop the underlying scientific and material cycle. The second thing to watch: how many Gulf states begin formally requesting Iranian approval for Strait of Hormuz transit? If that normalizes, Iran has achieved deterrence without firing another missile. We are already seeing quiet diplomatic maneuvers behind the scenes as regional capitals realize that Washington's security umbrella may not be able to guarantee the flow of commerce against a highly resilient subterranean adversary. The third thing to watch: U.S. Treasury sanctions targeting Caspian shipping entities. If those appear in the next 60 days, Washington has evidence Russia's supply route is escalating from components to assembled systems. Watch the maritime registry offices in Vladivostok and Astrakhan. If the U.S. starts blacklisting specific roll-on/roll-off cargo vessels, it will be a silent admission that the Caspian backdoor has become a major strategic vulnerability. Your homework: read 2 documents: the Congressional Research Service report, U.S. Military Operations Against Iran's Missile and Nuclear Programs, from March 6, 2026, on congress.gov, and the CSIS Nuclear Network Analysis, Disruption or Dismantlement, Diverging Assessments of Iran Nuclear Strikes, at nuclearnetwork.csis.org. And here is the question I cannot stop thinking about. If you cannot permanently destroy a buried arsenal without permanently eliminating the government that built it, was there ever a theory of victory here at all? Was there ever a plan for the day after the bombs stopped falling? I'll see you in the next one. If you find anything that contradicts what I've said today, come argue with me in the comments. I genuinely want that. Bring the source. I will read it. I don't care about being right. I care about getting the analysis right. If there is a satellite pass I've missed, an intelligence assessment that contradicts this, or a piece of physical evidence that shows a different reality, post it. Let's have a real, rigorous debate down there. Because here is the reframe I want to leave you with. Mainstream media asks, did the bombing of Iran work? That is the wrong question entirely. The question you should be asking is this: was there ever a coherent, sequenced theory of victory that explained what permanent success looks like against a country that spent 20 years engineering its military infrastructure to survive a direct American attack and rebuild within weeks using bulldozers? Because if the answer is no, then what we are watching is not the aftermath of a campaign that partially succeeded. It is the prologue to a confrontation that has not yet found its ending. I'll see you in the next one.